Okay. Okay. Sorry for the tech issues, and welcome to the first Scottish Aesthetics Forum talk of this term, and the first one we've had in person at Edinburgh this year. Is that true? No.
This academic year.
This academic year, I think it is true, actually. Okay, we've had some online talks, so that's why. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Rob Hopkins, who's a professor at NYU, but is living a currently extreme commuting lifestyle, I guess, since you live at least part of the time here in Edinburgh. So let us all be very friendly to make him think this is a great place to stay and enjoy. Rob probably needs no introduction to people familiar with philosophy of art. He's been a major figure for very many years. His most recent book is A Profile of Imagining. He's written other books, very, very many articles. He used to work at Sheffield and Birmingham, but we've lost him overseas. We think there are obvious reasons any sane person would return. So without further ado, I'll let Rob get on with the paper, the title of which has totally disappeared, Holism in Pictures and the Pervasiveness of Style.
Okay, thank you, Stacey. Thank you very much for having me. It's 10 years since I gave a talk in Edinburgh. I think it's my 4th talk ever in Edinburgh. So that does prove one thing in Stacey's introduction, which is that for many years I have been doing this. Okay, so maybe I should start by saying a bit about where I'm going with all this. That might help, I think. So let me just, if I can, flash through all these exciting things you're going to see to this. This is not, in a sense, the very crux of the issue that interests me, but it is something easy to get your teeth into. Why is it that great artists copy the work of other great artists? That's an interesting question. I can find no answer to it in art history. If anyone knows where one can be found, please tell me. It seems to me of obvious interest. Great writers don't copy the work of other great writers. Nobody writes out War and Peace. So why did Rubens, on the left, reproduce in such meticulous detail Titian's Rape of Europa on the right? Now, the answer has got to have something to do with the fact that there are differences between these things. You can think of other artists. I know, there weren't any reproductions. Maybe he just wanted to remember it, so he spent 2 days reproducing them. It's possible, but I'm interested in a different kind of answer. There are differences in style between these two works, even though Rubens has carefully reproduced all the content, much of the palette, and all the configuration, etc., of the Titian. Did I start to say Titian twice then? One is Rubens. Rubens is the correct. And that suggests that style is pervasive in the pictorial arts in a way that it's not in the literary arts. And in a way, that's an obvious thought. Why is it that we care that Rubens laid down these marks, whereas we don't mind if Tolstoy just dictated War and Peace to a scribe? The answer is that Rubens' hand making the marks allows Rubens' style to be expressed in making the painting in a way that it wouldn't be if he were writing a novel. In both arts, you make things with content or meaning. In both arts, a lot of style has to do with that content and how it's handled. But in the pictorial arts, style is more pervasive. It seems to be at the very moment of inscription that it is expressed, as well as in the meanings you're inscribing. Okay, so that's where I'm going. And then that may sound fun, it may not sound fun, but what won't be fun is all the torment I'm going to inflict on you en route to it. So, because this talk is going to try and get to this manifestly aesthetic topic by starting with a very unaesthetic topic, which is the semantics and syntax of pictures. Now, a little bit of background. Philosophers have been thinking about pictures hard for 50 years now. Most of that thinking has been trying to answer the following question. What makes something a picture of ... whatever it's of? What is it for one thing to depict, to represent in the distinctive way that pictures do, some scene or object? That's an interesting question. My first book, there are only 2. My first book was about that. I'm not interested in answering that question today. And I'm not interested in the resources that have most often been deployed to answer it, which is take the form of saying, well, pictures are somehow perceptual or visual representations in a way that, say, descriptions are. So you may at various points in the talk want to reach for that thought, and I want you to try and resist it, not because it's false, but because leaning on it would get rid of what is novel about the area I'm trying to open up. The area I'm trying to open up doesn't worry about what makes something a pictorial representation of whatever it is. It just wants to know about the structure of pictures, their semantic and syntactic structure. The structure they have as vehicles of representation, that's the syntactic side, and the structure of the meanings they generate, that's the semantic side. So people recently, including me, become interested in these questions, which are closely analogous to questions in the philosophy of language. All sentences I spew out mean what they do in part of what their parts mean and how those parts fit together. The question is, can we say something similar about pictures? And the gist of the talk is going to be this. Lots of people say yes, I say no. Saying no lets me answer the question about copying. That's where we're going. Okay. Confused? You will be. Now, let's start then with a simple thought. I warn you that early sections of the talk, the first 10 minutes is the cheapest. So you're welcome to leave at any time. But don't leave at 9.5 minutes thinking I can't face another 41 of this. Because there won't be another 41. Let's start with a simple thought, which we get from Jerry Ford. His picture principle. It's on your handout. It says, if P is a picture of O, then every meaningful part of P is a picture of a part of O. So take this Rembrandt sketch. It's a picture of a hut, with some trees growing by it and some scrappy heathland, something like that. And Fodor's principle says, well, since that's a picture of something, the things I just described, every part of this picture is itself a picture of a part of the scene the whole depicts. So, if we do something mildly amusing and jigsaw it, every jigsaw piece is a picture of a part of the whole scene. And indeed, that is how jigsaws work after all. So, I'm going to start just by talking about Fodor's principle a bit. I can persuade you it's true once we qualify it, refine it a little. So notice, Fodor, though he doesn't talk about picture semantics or anything like that, is interested in the thought that pictures are structured representations. There's a structure to the representation itself that is brought out, in this case, by turning it into a jigsaw. That's to chop up the representation. But there's also a structure to what it represents, to its meaning, because Fodor says every bit of this structure represents a bit of the other structure. Every part of the picture represents a part of the scene represented. So there's got to be structure in the vehicle and structure in the content. Structure in the thing that's doing the meaning and structure in the thing that's meant. So that's my first observation about the picture principle. In other words, it puts us in the ballpark of the topic I'm going to address to try and address my background interest. Secondly, notice this, Fodor's parts of pictures are spatial parts. They're what I will call subregions. So each bit of this is just a spatial bit of the larger pattern on the board. This is just a spatial part of the larger. It's a subregion. So Fodor's interested in parts that are spatial. Later we'll be interested in parts that are not so obviously spatial. And thirdly, Fodor says this shows the picture, the principle shows the pictures lack any canonical decomposition. By which he just means this: you can chop it up any way you like, and the picture principle stays true. There's no special way of chopping it up. The way to chop it up. You could have used smaller jigsaw pieces of different size. You could have taken a piece that was this piece, combined with this piece, combined with this piece, and treated it as one piece. Just be a complicated, disconnected subregion, and the principle would hold with just as much truth as it does. Whatever. So a picture is not like a sentence. My sentences, your sentences too, if they're well formed, should have a distinctive structure. And there's a way of analyzing them. Let's find the subject, let's find the verb if we think grammatically. slightly different terms if we start thinking more in terms of the philosophy of language. There's a way of analysing that reveals that privileged structure. Pictures aren't like that, according to the picture principle. Okay. Now here's something Fodor doesn't say, but he should say, really. He should say that the parts that he's interested in are what I'll call alethic, just taking it from the Greek for truth. By which I mean this. They are parts which have the following quality. If the whole is to be accurate, the part must be accurate, but not vice versa. So go back to this scene. If the whole picture is to be accurate, then the part depicting on the top of the door must be accurate, but not vice versa. This could be a perfectly accurate depiction of the top of the door, no matter what else is happening in the picture. So these parts are not just any old parts, they're parts that somehow determine the accuracy of the whole. They're alethic parts. Okay. End of section 1. There's only really 2 hard sections, I like to think. So let's get on with the second. Is the principle true? Well, yes, I think basically, provided we don't read it the wrong way. Here's the wrong way to read it. The wrong way to read it is the way that Fodor puts it. Fodor says, well, if this is a picture of a art, etc., etc., then every part of a picture of this is a picture of a part of that scene. But it's natural to hear is a picture of as meaning what I'll call is a viable picture of, i.e. something which even in isolation from the rest could serve as a picture. And that's not true. It's true of lots of bits of this. You take the tree bit, that's a perfectly good tree picture, even if we throw the rest away. But if we take this bit, it's not at all clear we've got a picture of anything once we throw the rest of it. Well, there's just not enough clues going on in this bit to tell us what's depicted. And that's certainly true of this bit, surely. I mean, I say I've drawn a picture of the sky, and I give you this. You're going to feel a little bit cheated. So that's okay, though, because things can depict without being viable pictures. In other words, parts of pictures can represent in the way that pictures represent, even though those parts wouldn't by themselves serve as pictures of things. That's the moral. So what Fodor should really say is this, that if P depicts such and such a scene, then every part of P depicts a part of that scene. That just doesn't talk about is a picture of, and so drops the natural reading in terms of as a viable picture. Okay. Everyone happy? So, let's set Fodor aside. I've turned to him because he introduces the theme I'm interested in, the structural pictures, and gives us some useful tools, which I'm afraid I'm going to come back later. Notion of a viable picture, notion of a lithic. But let's set him aside and ask him this question. Is he right to say, as he does, it's implicit in his third claim about canonical decomposition, that the picture principle is the only principle governing the syntax and semantics of pictures? He thinks he is. That's why he says this is the only principle, so that's why there's no canonical decomposition. But some people disagree, and these are the guys who've been writing more recently about this stuff, who I'm taking as my wrestling partners for today's talk. So these are people like John Willits, now sadly passed, John Kulbicki, Gabriel Greenberg. These guys think the following. They think, actually, you can go a lot further than the past principle. You can generate what we can call a compositional semantics for pictures. That's to say, a set of principles, knowing which and knowing what the parts of the picture are will allow you to work out what the whole picture represents. You can generate a compositional semantics of pictures as long as you, as it were, appeal to other principles. Let me just say, give you that thing about compositional semantics again, because it's going to matter. Think about language. If you know what the words in my sentence mean, and you know about the rules for combining them to make wholes, then you can work out what my words mean, my whole sentence. That's compositional semantics for language. These guys think you can do it for pictures too. You couldn't do it with Fodor's principle. It doesn't really tell you enough. You just have to, from what all the parts were, with all the parts depicted, and then say something about how they all go together. But you're really sort of floundering. But these guys are going to give you much, much more. They're going to break down the structure of pictures to a level of detail which will allow us to build up the meaning of the whole from the meaning of the parts. That's their plan. And to do that, they rely on three main movements. So here they are. Firstly, they shouldn't follow photo and implicitly think the only meaningful parts of pictures are subregions. Subregions of pictures, the kind of things the jigsaw exemplifies, are indeed meaningful parts of pictures, but they're not the only ones. There are at least two other kinds, these guys say. We should distinguish between locations of the picture, places on the picture's surface, and the features that go at those locations. Maybe I'll change example. Not so easily, yes I will. Let's take this from here. It's not very clear where the picture stops, ever about. Point of information, this is very interesting. No mark marks the edge of girl's nose, far side of her nose. That is really news when you work it out. I stared at this painting in the flesh for a long time before I convinced myself that was true. It's a subjective contour that can reason. That's just a point of information. So let's take this picture. It represents a girl with a pearl earring, got that great hair, saying what else it represents. There are places on the picture. They are what I'll call locations. And in those places, there are features that I'll call locatables. So for instance, right here, this place I'm pointing to, there's blue. And that blue is representationally significant. It's a meaningful feature instantiated of this part of the picture. And the picture means something complicated and includes something bluish in that part of the world because a meaningful location has a meaningful locatability. That's the first idea of these guys. So you could think of them as treating pictures like maps. Think about a simple map. There's a load of places on the map, and there's some mapping, as we say, that takes you from those places to some territory, some bit of the world mapped. The places on the map are locations, but if that's all you had, a way of correlating places on the map with places in the world, the map wouldn't say anything. It's also got to represent some features as being at the places. And to do that, you've got to put some features on the map. You've got to, for instance, colour this bit blue, colour this bit green. Blue means sea, green means land, perhaps in your map. So again, we've got the same structure of locations and locatables. Meaning is generated by combining the two. Okay, so we need some rules to take us from locations to places represented and from locatables to features represented. And here's, in the terminology of one of these guys, John Willett, the drawing rule takes us from locations to places, and a denotation rule takes us from locatables to features. So in a picture like this, the drawing rule is basically linear perspective. It's some projection, geometrical projection from the possible space onto a two-dimensional plane. So that, for instance, places further up the picture represent places further up in directions from some point in represented space in the space. And the colours on the picture represent something like colours in the space. I'll say more in a minute about that. Okay, so with a drawing rule that says this place means this position in the world, this place means that position in the world, and a denotation rule that says this feature means this feature in the world, that feature means this feature in the world, you're getting along very well. And then all you need to do to get the meaning of the whole picture is some kind of rule for putting it all together. And that's just this, the composition rule. Placing a locatable at a location predicates of the place in the world represented by the location, the feature represented by the locatable. Or putting it in ordinary English, if I want to represent a place represented by this spot on the picture as being bluish, I'd better put some blue paint here. It's that simple. The meaning of the whole is just the conjunction of all the meanings of the little bits you get when you perform the operation I've just described. Okay. Now, that's the first thought. We need to move beyond subregions. Subregions are well and good. Locations and locatables are the really basic, meaningful parts of pictures. But notice they're not subregions. You might think a location is like the smallest possible subregion, it's just a point. Fine, I'll grant you that. But a locatable is a feature. It's a universal. It's not a part of anything. It's something that can be instantiated by parts of things. It's things like colours or textures. Okay, the second thought this trio of opponents of mine have is this. There are actually different systems of picturing using different denotation and drawing rules. So we shouldn't expect to be able to describe the structure of all pictures in a single set of terms. At an abstract level, there are a single set of terms, locations, locatables, and rules for correlating with meanings. But different rules for different kinds of pictures. So for instance, the way that a veneer works and the way that a line drawing works might be very different. This is called as line drawing portrait. Sat. Well, what about silhouettes? They maybe work differently again. So in line drawing, lines seem to be the key locatables. Whereas in silhouettes, regions seem to be the key locatables. And what lines represent is a question should fluoresce my opponents on. They're going to say something like edges. On what areas, regions of this represent going to be something like volumes. And so this volume represents Don Quixote's shoe. So this region represents a volume, which is Don Quixote's shoe. Third thought is that what I've just said was highly misleading, deliberately, of course, because pictorial content comes in layers according to these guys. And the compositional semantics they're going to give you, the rules they give you for building the meaning of the whole rather than the parts, only applies to the most basic layer. So they follow, or we can follow, John Konvicky, John Hawkland, who introduced the notion of bare bones content into philosophy. Bare bones content is just the most stripped down content any kind of representation has. So Hawkland gives an example of, no, never mind, let's do the pictures. The bare bones content of these pictures is much, much thinner than what you would say they depict. And the illustrator. That's not very helpful. Let me try. Well, that's interesting but not helpful. Let's look at this. Suppose you're working to produce a certain kind of picture. It's a picture to which a colour photography belongs, that kind of thing. Also Vermeer. Now, some of you may know that Vermeer, some people think Vermeer painted his pictures using a camera obscura. It's not the point I'm currently making. Whether he did or not, he made a kind of picture you could make by using a camera obscura, or a camera for that matter. It's what I'm going to call an optical picture. What's special about optical pictures is that they involve a distinctive drawing rule and a distinctive denotation rule, set of denotation rules. The drawing rule is linear perspective, basically. Points in the world are mapped onto a flat plane by a projection system that basically is linear perspective. You can do it mechanically, you can do it by hand, you can do it all sorts of ways. This is just a very simple way to do it. So in case you're not sure what's going on here, this is a dark box with light coming from the outside, producing an inverted image. And this guy is putting dots of paint on the transparent screen onto which the image is projected. He is making a painting in a kind of crude, semi-mechanical way. Like if you couldn't have a real camera, where you had access to people in 18th century clothes and boxes and things, you could take this on holiday with you. They go to it. Now, in making his picture, which is the same kind of picture as the Vermeer, but Vermeer was made this well on, is the same kind of picture as a colour photograph. What's this guy got to do? Well, he's just got to take the pattern of coloured light on his transparent screen, and as best he can, reproduce it. What can't he capture that way? Just by the choice of paint colour he lays down. One thing is he can't capture depth. In the resulting picture, we will no doubt see depth. But this image here, this needn't have been a woman. It could have been some funny three-dimensional object where the head was much bigger and much further this way, disconnected from the body, and the pattern on the screen would come out just the same. So the drawing system here is insensitive to the dimension of depth. So any content generated by that drawing system will be two-dimensional only. That's the first respect. This is bare bones. What about the denotation system? Well, the rule the guy is following is just put put the colour of paint where you see the colour of light. Where you see red light, you see amber light of amber. But what does he do when he reproduces that? Look at the woman's dress. The colour of the dress is constant, but the way the light plays across it changes the colour it presents. What I'll call the aperture colour, the colour you'd seem to see if you're looking through a tiny aperture, varies as you look at different parts of the dress, depending on whether it's in shade or light. And this guy is going to use different paint with different bits of light projecting on the screen, varying just along that dimension. So he's not copying the colour of the woman's dress, he's copying, if you like, the appearance of that colour given the lighting condition. Or as I would prefer to put it, he's copying the pattern of aperture colours that the dress presents at the point where the lens is. So, still on my third point about the compositional semantics here doesn't get you normal pictorial content. What it gets you in this case is the following. The rules, drawing and denotation, generate content, a meaning for the picture, which is just a two-dimensional array of aperture colours. It's just a pattern of coloured light. That is the basic content of the picture. Whether that thing is, as you no doubt take it to be, looking at this nice oil painting, a woman standing in a garden, or whether it is a photograph of a woman standing in a garden, or whether it is some funny three-dimensional skewed object presenting the right colours, all that is left open by the bare bones content of the picture. So, what have we learned so far? If you follow these guys with their three principles of investigation, you can look like you can generate compositional semantics for some pictorial content. It's only, example we've seen so far, applies to some pictures, what I call optical pictures. Colour pictures that use colour to represent colour, and do so in something like linear perspective. And even for those pictures, you don't get to explain why they have the content that we would naturally say they do, or wouldn't even know. You only get to say, well, there's a basic level of content this has, which is a two-dimensional array of coloured light, and I've explained why the picture has that content. Then all the rest is to be generated by some other means, which you're glad to know, these guys do more than wave their hands. Okay. Even so, this is real progress, because you can treat an optical picture like the veneer as, if you like, a very simple map of the space of coloured light. That's what these guys have shown us how to do. And that is impressive. I take my hat off to it. Now, I take my hat off to them, and then I trample on it, or rather I take their hat off, trample on their hats, because in the end, I think this is not going to work. And the rest of the talk is largely about why not. So first notice a consequence of their approach. It's really just built into their ambitions. I call it a corollary. It's at the bottom of the first slide. The corollary is just this. If these guys are right, they're knowing the right kind of picture, what the drawing rule is, what the denotation rule is, knowing what its relevant parts are, i.e., what locatables or what locations, should allow you to predict the bare bones content of that picture. You should be able to, just by applying these rules, be able to tell me what the content of this is if I give you enough information about what colours are there on the picture's surface. It is, if you like, a predictive compositional semantics. It's forward-looking. Once you know what the parts are and what features they bear, you can work out from the rules what the meaning of the whole is. The least bare bones content, the less you should be able to do it. And it's precisely that I'm skeptical. In a short reason I'm skeptical is that I'm now trying to explain to you that pictures are holistic in a way that language is not. It's that holism that screws things up. So, what is this holism? Well, here's the holism that really interests me. It actually combines two different strands of our separating and playing one by the other. I call it local combined holism, and it's just this. For some parts of the picture, whether those parts mean anything at all, And what they mean depends on which other parts mean anything and what they mean. So the principle says you can't get away with just knowing of one part of a picture, where it is and what features it has. You can't apply rules that already get you some content, because whether you've got any meaning and what meaning you've got depends on the rest. There's just no way to build that into a compositional semantics. Okay. Notice from here on, when I say part, I mean either subregions or locations or located points. Very easy to hear part and subregion. Stop doing that. Thank you. Okay, now it's pretty obvious it's a combination of two different sides of claim, I guess. One of them is what you might call local content holism. That's the what bit. What the parts mean depends on what the other part means. And the other part is what we might call vehicle holism. Whether you've got any meaning at all, that's the weather bit. So let me just soften up by just giving you a little bit of evidence that we do these holisms are not kind of just made up by me. Take any picture. Take this picture, for instance. It represents what it does. Or does it? Not if you stick it in the right context. Because in isolation, this represents, well, let's just suppose it's Samson having his haircut in front of the rider, something like that. A guy wrestling before a woman. But once you nest it in a bigger picture, this doesn't depict that. This depicts a picture of that. So you can turn a picture of X into a picture of X just by putting it in the right context. And that, my friends, is local content holism in action. And of course, you can pull the trigger of that at the same time. What about local vehicle holism? I admit it's really hard to put a really good example of this, and that's because, in a way, pictures don't have a syntax. And they have to have a syntax for you to get a good example of this. But here's just to give you a feel for how fluid the world of the pictorial is. What colour a given location is depends on the colours around it. This is a fact very well known by painters. If you want your picture, never mind what's depicted, if you want your picture to look to be this colour, you better pay a lot of attention to what other colours are around. That indicates a certain pull from the other parts of the picture on the relevant features of the part you're targeting. And that's at least in the ballpark of vehicle holism. Now let me say straight off, I am not telling you that pictures are just some big woozy mess and nothing can be said about their structure. No, go back to photo. That is right. Pictures have structure, but they only have that structure. At least, that's not quite right. The only structure, pictures have structure, but they don't have structure that points forwards in the way that the compositional semanticist does. They don't have the kind of structure that lets you predict on the basis of knowledge of parts what the whole will be. They only have the kind of structure you can analyze after the event. Given a picture, you can then perfectly usefully say that bit represents that place, that feature represents such and such a feature. But that's because you know the context. What you can't do is reverse thrust and say, if I was to build another picture using this place, such and such would follow. So you can only have compositional semantics in a backward looking direction. You can analyze but not predict. That's my view. Okay, so why should you believe this? Or putting it another way, could you just give me some more reason to believe this local content holism is true? That's new to aggressively, not universally. And the answer is yes, I will try. I'll do my very best. I'm not going to bully you into the ground, or putting it another way, give you really good reasons for believing this. I'm going to soften you up by giving you all the reasons I currently have, or at least a good portion of the reasons I currently have. And we could see each other. Okay. Now, here's some other cases of nesting, just to suppose this something like nesting. Nesting was taking a picture, which was a picture of X, and putting it in the context that turned the picture of X into a picture of X, thereby changing its content. Something like that happens with the representation of mirrors in pictures. Let me give you a non-pictorial, a filmic example. In the first Matrix movie, the only good Matrix, for the first 20 minutes, things seem fine until after the Neo's taken the red pill, we realised the first 20 minutes everything was not fine. Everything was rather grimy and low resolution. That feature of the first 20 minutes of the film, which is swept away when he wakes up in the Matrix itself, or in the wherever those people live, human farm, that feature is suddenly given a representational significance it didn't have before. It clearly indicates, more or less pictorially, that you weren't seeing the real world before, you were seeing electronic generated reconstruction. A bit like an image in a mirror, something a little bit lower res, a little bit less vivid. So that feature, which might have had no representational significance, acquires one when it's put in the context of the other parts of the picture. And similarly, if lots of paintings, in this angle, for instance, have low res, low color background, tells you in the context of rest, this is a picture of a reflection of the woman mirror, not just in the back of the woman. Okay, so nesting is not just about making pictures of pictures, but that's not enough. I'm just softening you up further. Let me give you some more general considerations. So how about this for a general consideration? Something I rather grandly call the threshold of viability. Let's move to an altogether more elevated picture. In lots of very simple pictures, although they depict what they do, and although they are structured, so the subregions represent parts of the whole, these dots represent the eyes, this dot represents the nose, the mouth, etc. At least maybe this picture's a tiny bit too rich for this, but you can just get an example. If you took away any of the parts, you lose all the meaning. If you only had the nose, you wouldn't have a picture of the nose. You wouldn't have a viable picture of it. There is some crucial threshold of which you've got just enough parts to have a picture of something. Or if you were to take any one away, you wouldn't have a picture of anything. So at least as far as being a viable picture goes, there is a threshold of viability. But when you don't have a viable picture, you don't have a depiction of anything. So earlier I was keen to separate a part depicting from its being a viable picture. What I did not say was that you can have depiction in the absence of viable context. If you're going to depict anything, it must be part of or be a viable picture you're dealing with. So at the threshold of viability, all depiction disappears. And so we have another instance of holism. It's a holism of whether anything, the parts mean anything at all, depending on whether the other parts mean anything at all. Okay, that's the whether bit of combined holism. What about the what bit? Well, here's some more elevated pictures. These are slightly more elevated actually, because although, like me, you've probably experienced, school we used to have this joke. What's this? Oh, I don't know, is it a donut? No. Is it a fried egg seen from above? No, it's a mix of wearing a sombrero seen from above. Or what Gombrich calls, down, it's too hard. What Gombrich calls droodles. And these are droodles by a rather distinguished artist, and not on one of his good days, Annabelle Production. So this one is supposed to be, this is 17th century Italy. This is a bricklayer. I assume they wore something a bit like bowler hats. And his trowel peeping over the top of the wall he's just built. And this is a Capuchin priest, they wore pointed hats, asleep in his pulpit. The point of these examples is, the point about a drill is you can go many, many ways with it. Nothing really determines one way or another. If you were to add more detail, you would determine which way you go. So adding parts, some sombrero type decoration, would determine the meaning of the whole. The other parts would start to mean things like the top of the sombrero, something like that, because of what these new parts mean. And this formula of droodles is pretty widespread. You could do it with any picture. If you strip it down, you're going to get to a droodly bit. Okay. So putting these two bits together, threshold of viability and the droodle phenomenon, you might think, I see, as you build many a picture that has to approach a threshold of viability. And exactly how you cross it will determine not just whether the other parts mean anything, but what they mean. That is local combined hope. Now, let me give my opponents some comeback. Here's two moves they can make. They could say, oh, well, as you fiddle around with the different possible contents, you're moving between different pictorial systems. They could say that. Because remember, different systems define by different rules. Compositional semantics moves from a set of rules to the meaning of a whole within a system. It doesn't take you across systems any more than knowing the rules of English will help you understand sentences in Italian. They could say that, I think that's very nice. I mean, the truth is, intuitively, they're all just line drawings. If we start individuating systems so finely that whatever I add next takes me to a different system, the whole theory is lacking real explanatory value. So let's not have them say that. Let's spare them that. Here's a better line. Remember that compositional semantics only governs the most basic level of pictorial content. And I've been ignoring all that, haven't I? When I was talking about the face, I was talking about the eyes and the nose. And that was fair enough, because remember, without the other parts, there's no picture, and there's no picture, there's no depicted meaning at all. So there's no depicted bare bones content either. I wasn't exactly cheating, but I have been operating at a richer level of content. So what these guys should say, I think, my way of comeback is, well, maybe if we just concentrate on the bare bones content, everything will be hunky-dory. Maybe across the Drudels, the bare bones content will be constant across the rival interpretations. Then we only have the weather point, not the what. The pressure of viability thing, not the other thing. So they could say that. That's interesting. I mean, really, I think at this point, they just need to do their work. Because the only pictures which they're trying to give a compositional semantics are the ones I call optical. There's gesturing and no more with line drawings and things. And line drawings are just the tip of a vast iceberg of pictorial styles, what they would have to think on the systems. So let's hear it, guys. I say at this point. You tell me what the bare bones content of these pictures is, and then we can argue about whether it's holistic. Okay. Here's another thought you might have on their side. I mean, come on, Rob, surely you can just design a picture by system. First, I give you a projectional system, then I give you a list of what the various things, locatables I'm going to put in the picture mean. And then I tell you the picture means whatever the rules I've given you suggest. You can do that. You can generate all sorts of projection systems. We saw some before. Are they there? Different ways of projecting space onto a two-dimensional surface. If you specify that's your drawing system and then specify some denotation system, you might hope to fix the meaning of your symbols by stipulation. I think you probably can do that. This is the equivalent in pictures of formal language. It's a highly disciplined, regimented, somewhat unrepresentative specimen. And I'm not denying that's not possible. Although, actually, I do wonder whether it's possible. I have a paper which I cite on here, in which I take something that looks like it should fit this and say if the things go badly enough wrong, then the meaning won't be what the system dictates. It'll be bent by how people perceive the picture. So even here I'm a little skeptical, but I'm going to concede that. I'm not suggesting that no pictures of this kind of regimentation, no pictures can be analysed in the terms my friends want, the predictive compositional semantics. I'm just suggesting lots can't. And to see about the lots point, just take Drudels on their own thing, I know. Think about the threshold of viability. Suppose we ask ourselves this question. Does every picture have to cross that threshold? Is every picture, as we took bits away, we reach a point where if we took one more bit away, we'd have no picture left. We'd just have some meaningless junk. The answer's not obviously yes, actually. Couldn't you have a photograph of infinite resolution? So however small an area you looked at, it would be meaningful? Maybe. Maybe. That's one way to avoid this threshold, which is to say you break down into parts that remain viable pictures of other some of the parts. Another way to break it down would be to break it down into parts where the smallest viable parts have no parts of their own. They have no elicit parts. the atoms didn't admit of any breakdown into lithic elements. And that is really hard to get. The long and short of it is, whether there could be pictures that did not cross the threshold of viability, all actual pictures, or very nearly all of them, do. And so I am encouraged to think that local combined holism will be pretty widespread. So my tentative conclusion, not of the whole talk, I'm sad to say, I am, drifting towards my interest in this, is that there may be pictorial schemes governed by predictive compositional semantics, at least some pictures don't belong to such schemes. Okay, so what? I'll give you a nicer picture to look at while okay, it's not doing anything except providing a better background. Well, here's the interest of this. I'm first going to give you an argument, and then I'm going to turn back to the copy question. Here's the argument. For those pictures that do exhibit local combined holism, so for those pictures for which you cannot offer a predictive compositional semantics, I claim the following is true. First truth is just what I just said. Firstly, what I just said, i.e., these pictures are subject to a local combined holism that form conclusive indoors for how to meet the content. There's no way of making these pictures in a rule-guided way. There are no rules that will tell you how to get from the meaning of the parts in the whole. Secondly, the claim I've done nothing to defend, and indeed am ill-suited to defend, given how ignorant I am of the philosophy of language, but I think it's plausible. No parallel claim is true for the literal meaning of any description. So there are no descriptions, it's a written representation, where with respect to their literal meaning, the compositional semantics is not a bit. That, I take it, is just an endorsement of the project that our friends in philosophy of language have been pursuing for a long time. So I don't suppose there'll be too much resistance to the general thrust of it. There might be disputes at the margins. Anyway, thirdly, where local combined holism obtains, then the symbol maker, be it the painter or the writer, must make symbols bearing the desired meaning without being guided by rules, just follows from one. Where she does that non-accidentally, so she doesn't just get lucky, she may pull it off. She gets to represent what she wanted to represent by exercising technique, as you'd hope she did. Fifthly, where technique is exercised in solving a problem, someone has the means, the ability to find, then there's always room for her finding in a distinctive way. That is her style of finding. So where the painter is solving these basic representational problems by exercising technique, she may do so in a way that manifests her individual style. So, conclusion, these pictures, the ones governed by local combined holism, offer opportunities in the making of their basic content, depicted content, for the exercise of technique and the manifesting of style, but descriptions do not do the same practice. So style is more pervasive in painting than in writing, which was one of my starting points. Now, let me just clarify a couple of thoughts here. Firstly, the right pictures. I mean, you might think, well, I get the argument, but how can the examples get us there? There's doodles, kiddies' pictures of faces are hardly interesting manifestations of style. That's quite true. They're just illustrating the general structure in play. But in case you want an example, take this. This is by an artist called Samuel Palmer in a Shore Garden from 1816. It's an Indian ink, watercolor and gouache painting. And there's an interesting article by an art historian called Paul Smith, analysing exactly how repeated marks in this painting mean very different things in different contexts in painting. So for instance, take a little, many little dark circles. Sometimes they represent leaves, sometimes they represent bits of shadow, bits of scrub. Sometimes they're simply there to bring out the brightness of the surrounding colours, to make the blossom look brighter. to look at these dark lines around here. They don't represent dark lines or anything like that in the space. They don't even represent the edges of the blossoms. They simply serve to intensify the light of the blossoms for you. Okay, so that's an example of something like the sort of holism that interests me, where I take it, it's being deployed to more interesting artistic effect, may indeed involve Palmer's distinctive style. Second observation, I said in the conclusion, which I keep calling 6, but obviously I've renamed C, the basic matters. The claim is not that there's no room for style in literature, obviously not. The claim is not that in literature the only room for style is in choice of content and how it's handled. The claim is only that as far as the basic meaning of literature goes, the literal meaning of the words, there isn't the room for style there is in painting. I am very open to the thought you can find it in Susan Langan, whose work on art I'm incredibly enthusiastic about. Her thought was that all artistic creation essentially involves the kind of holism that I've described pictures involved. It's just that for other kinds of symbols, like literary symbols, it only comes out at a higher level. So it's not the basic meaning where the holism can be found, it's at a higher level where, for instance, that meaning interacts with other features of the text, like its sound and its structure, the imagery it draws on. Thirdly, why do I say may in 4? She may do some exercise technique. Because even if there aren't rules to follow, there are sometimes mechanical solutions. Just think about a camera. If I'm right, making pictures of things involves solving problems in a non-rule governed way, but we've all got a great way of making pictures of things just by using mechanical devices like cameras. So the thought is not that your technique must be exercised, it's just that it may be. And fourthly, notice this about my conclusion. It's not enough that style was manifested in the making of it. Obviously, it's got to show up in the product. It shouldn't just be a feature of the process. So I need the exercise, the manifestation of style in the exercise of technique to solve representation problems to come out in the representations created, not just in the creating. Okay, so that's my argument. Let's get back to copies. How is this going to help with this problem? Let me start by conceding that the Rubens are usually close copy, although Rubens made similarly close copies of other great works. So if we move to another one of Rubens's copies, actually, one of his slightly less close ones, this is Caravaggio's Entombment. And Rubens has reproduced large slices of it and changed it very significantly. So the amazing fan pattern created by the mourners in the Caravaggio is gone from the Rubens. Even so, there are large passages of this where he's copying very closely. Moving further away again, we go to Van Gogh's copy of Millet's. We have slightly different names, but the basic moon harvest. He's reversed the image, obviously changed the colours considerably. Even so, there's an awful lot that's in common here, actually, really a surprising amount. So much in common, I think my puzzlement stands. Why is he doing this? Anyway, let's go back to the best case for me, which is this one. So how is all this going to help address this question of why great artists make copies? Here's my answer. It's not entirely straightforward. Rubens, confronted with Titian, has nothing to learn from Titian about how to paint. Rubens is Rubens. Right? Rubens is not some trainee. So he's not copying in order to learn how to do things. What he's doing is copying in order to see how his distinctive way of solving representational problems matches up to Titian's. So he lets everything be fixed except the representational crux. He lets the content be fixed right down to matters of detail, not all the way down, but everything non-incidental is the same. So, for instance, the two backgrounds differ slightly. Neither painter's very interested. This is not that. Everything else is really very close, but they do differ stylistically because each of them has had to solve a set of problems about how to represent just this using the resources you have. They're the set of problems I've tried to draw attention to as requiring non-rule-governed solutions. So each of them can exercise technique and manifest style in solving those very problems. And in doing so, Rubens gets to see how his style compares to Titian's. This aspect of his style, this point where style is most pervasive in painting and where there's no analogue in writing. And in doing that, of course, he gets to understand his own style better. What better way to see how he do things than to compare it with someone else doing it different. And in doing that, no doubt, he made adjustments. Understanding his style better, he saw ways of doing things. That is why Rubens was not crazy to go around copying paintings, despite the tremendous effort. Now, this is my explanation. I cannot persuade you it's the best explanation. You have to look at all sorts of evidence. Maybe Rubens had a terrible visual memory. Seems unlikely. Maybe he did. But want to remember the Titian. But it's at least an explanation, and it's an explanation which fits with the fact which I'm taken, independently plausible, but also supported anyway by these cases, which is that in painting, style is hugely pervasive in the way that it is not in the literary arts. Thank you.